Another brace of LegCo candidates on Perspective with Brian Brumby, former president of the Manx National Farmers Union, up first, followed by semi-retired engineer Gary Clueit. Both candidates speak with passion, but are they capable of providing the scrutiny, support and leadership the island needs to solve the problems we're facing? Brian Brumby, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm currently farming at Ballyclingham Farm, just outside Ramsey in Lezayre. Been there for the last 25 years. The general people out there will probably know us better as Silly Moose Campsite and the Silly Moose Attractions. So I'm non-Manx, originally from the UK, left school at 16 with 5 O levels and proceeded to follow a career in agriculture. That included 4 years of self-funding through agricultural colleges to get the right qualifications and moving around the UK, different jobs with more responsibility as I went, and eventually ended up in Devon for 9 years, managing one of the largest units in the UK at the time with 700 head.
And there was that dairy or beef?
That up to that point, it was all dairy.
Okay.
So, many 70-80 hour weeks go into that, and all weathers, etc. So, as I said, 9 years in Devon, and then my wife and I, we started looking for opportunities to start our own business. At the time, there was a wonderful thing called milk quotas attached with the EU, and that is basically paying money to get a licence to produce milk. The Isle of Man wasn't in the UK, and that didn't apply, and I noticed that there was a farm came up on a share farming opportunity on the island, that being Ballyclingham Farm. We applied for it and got that. And the beauty of it was limited amount of capital we had at that stage could all be invested into stock and machinery rather than buying this license to produce milk. So that's basically how we ended up on the Isle of Man. We continued doing the dairy side for 15 years on the island, partook in all the shows, etc. We had a passion to get to the top of our profession. We were importing embryos from all over the world, and we were selling stock. We had at one point the UK's highest indexing animal on the farm, and we sold stock to Holland, Germany, France, Spain and Ireland, among other places.
So it's certainly fair to say you've had plenty of life experiences then in relation to the work you've been doing.
Yeah, and that so far took us up to 10 years ago, where we had a change of plan or a change of policy in conjunction with the farm owner, and we changed from dairy into beef, and that gave us the opportunity then to develop 2 other businesses, which was Silly Moose Campsite and the Silly Moose Attractions, and they both started from small beginnings, and to be honest, it's taken us a little bit by surprise on how successful and how well they've gone. And if you'd have told me when I was 20-year-old in agricultural college that I would end up in the Isle of Man running a campsite, I would never have believed it, but that's where life's taken us, and it's been a very good experience.
And I suppose people listening may well be thinking, how is it that someone who is effectively or has been brought up as a food producer is now running a campsite?
Diversification on farms is a big issue. Farming profits, we weren't making the profits that we would like to for our future in buying property and pension-wise, etc. So, yes, we're looking for other opportunities. We are on the TT course, so a campsite was a possibility all the way along. But we probably tackled it different to what other people would, because Fiona and myself had never been camping as such. But what we did was take a blank bit of paper and put down, if I did go camping, what would I need? And so, showers that you're not queuing for hours, that have hot water 24/7, clean toilets, Wi-Fi, free tea and coffee. We've got an indoor shed as a social area. We put entertainment on there during TT with bands, etc. And that's as it's grown, etc. And that's what we've delivered, and been very successful. We have a very high rebooking rate, and was been turning people away because we've been full for this year's TT since October of last year.
And I suppose in that role, you must get to hear a wide range of people's views and opinions.
Yeah, it's broadened my horizons tremendously. The campsite and the Silly Moose attractions, which includes the Dark Horse Music Festival and planning weddings for people. And it brings me into contact with thousands of different people a year, all the way from landed gentry down to strange men who live in sheds at the bottom of the garden all year and come out for the Manx Grand Prix. And it also has brought us in contact from people in virtually every country of the world as well. And they all come with a different viewpoint and a different opinion. And that's talking to them, and has been very valuable on the debating side. And I even had a debate with some Germans one year who were wishing they were doing the Brexit or German exit, whatever the abbreviation would be, saying we were all doing the right thing. And I was unsure at the time, and I probably still am.
So in relation to all this then, as part of your farming career, you've also had a role to play with the leadership of the Manx National Farmers Union, which is the main lobbying body for Manx agriculture. That would have brought you into contact with government, and that hasn't put you off deciding to stand for LegCo?
No, not at all. I've always been politically interested. Agriculture plus the other business developments has never been a huge amount of time, so my political interest has been through the Manx National Farmers Union. I've been involved in that right from moving to the island, firstly attending branch meetings and then gradually moving up, and eventually I spent 6 years as a president of the union. As you rightly say, yes, it brought us into contact with government and scrutinising government policy, challenging that policy, also bringing forward ideas for frameworks for future policy. And yes, as president of the National Farmers Union, you say you're the leader of the union, which, yes, you are. But you're more the voice piece for the union, because there's 3 branches throughout the island, monthly meetings, attended for the vast majority of those. There's 400 members, which again is probably 399 different opinions. And you don't stay as leader of that for 6 years unless you are listening, debating and taking the majority with you. It's not a dictatorship where, as a leader as such, it is more of a mouthpiece.
So you obviously you've had political experience. What motivates you to actually stand for this Legislative Council election?
Right. Well, in another 6 months, my term at Ballyclingham Farm comes to an end, and we won't be extending now because I'm 64 now. I'm not going to extend for another 25-year period or something like that. So, having lived on this island for 25 years and very, very much call it home now, and think it's a wonderful place with a lot to offer. And whatever I can put back into the system, if you like, and through the MLC legislation and getting that right so that it's workable for the island and the island can go on and prosper and thrive, that's the angle that I'm coming from.
And you clearly have a passion for agricultural politics. You've never thought about standing for the House of Keys?
I've been thought about it, and I've been asked several times, but other business commitments were taking priority at the time. So no, there wasn't time or the place to step out of other business commitments to do that. So I channeled everything through the Manx Farmers Union and politically that way, but I don't want to come across as just standing as MLC for an agricultural viewpoint. I have this background as well in hospitality and tourism. I done work on the environment. In fact, at the start of the last administration, DEFA came forward with a heady scheme proposal, which as a union we rejected, and I brought forward as a counter proposal what is now developed into the agri-environment scheme. So there's an environment aspect there. Green energy, I've researched a lot and been champion agriculture's potential role in green energy production and what it could do for the island. And that has also developed now into one of the few industries that can actually sequester carbon as well. And I started getting involved in that, and it was back in 12, 13, 14 years ago. And the administration at the time, which I believe you were part of, Phil, had a carbon reduction target of 15% by 2015. And so I started looking for the opportunities. Where can agriculture get involved in this? Green energy production being the main one. But that policy, because it wasn't going to be reached, then got kicked into the long grass, and they came up with the 35% by 2030 policy. And I am concerned that, at the rate we're changing now, that this policy will eventually get kicked into the long grass if we're not very careful. And where I live, on the north of the island, just outside Ramsey, if sea levels rise 20 foot, as on some predictions with 2-degree global warming, I'll be living in a 1-story bungalow instead of a 2-story house, and I'll need a boat to get home instead of a car. So I have got quite a bit of necessity for these things to move on.
So what you have sort of indicated is that you will have more time in 6 months' time. So you wouldn't think of the Keys at some future point then. It's definitely LegCo for you.
I would see that as as an introduction, and then see how he goes. But as I've said, I'm 64 years old, so I don't need another job as such. But I am very interested in putting back into the island, and hard-nosed businessman a lot of the time, but also a compassion side to that. I instigated the Farmers Union charity sale for Ukrainian refugees last year that raised £13,000. And we do, I don't want to shout too loudly, else we'll be full of TT marshals, but we do half price for TT marshals on the campsite for the TT and the Manx Grand Prix, and we've sponsored a sidecar unit as well. So it's putting back into the system and contributing, because it's very easy to take, and putting back in, get a lot of satisfaction from as well.
There's a lot of people say that you need to have experience of the law to be able to properly do the role of legislative council. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. Yes, the Legislative Council most definitely needs people with law experience on it, but it doesn't need everybody on the Legislative Council to have law experience. And it also needs people with corporate experience in Douglas, because that's very important to the island, and it probably needs representation from people who have worked in the civil service and other areas. But what it does need to be is widespread and all sectors represented. And I think I come from a different background and a different career path and a different representation to the other candidates that are going for the MLC, in that I'm small business and business startup and business expansion, and then I've got the tourism and the hospitality and etc. tagged on as well. So at the start of this process, the president of Tynwald, I think it was on a radio interview, it might have been just a news clip, was saying, we need a broad range, a broad church. And yes, you're right, we do. And that's started me to come forward then and, really think about it and what I could deliver. And, if the MHKs believe in that and think that's right for the island, well, I'm the one with the point of difference, if you like.
So, assuming then that you were successful at this Legislative Council election, what would you say if the Chief Minister rang you up one evening and said, there's a vacancy in the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture, will you go there?
Yeah, it all comes to this question of the role of MLC, and it's multi-layered and it seems to contradict itself because the first and foremost job is scrutinising legislation, understanding the policy and what that's trying to deliver and getting the legislation to match. And then where I would come in and be a benefit is getting that legislation right so it works out there on the coalface, if you like, of the industry and works for the small businesses. Because I don't know whether you noticed yesterday, the UK just announced their tax receipts had been a lot higher than they were planning, and they put that down to the success of the self-employed sector. So there is a big value there to be tapped into. But then so you're scrutinising Keys legislation or Keys business, if you like, and so you don't want to be part of that to keep a clear blue line there. But then once a month you become part of Tynwald, and all of a sudden you become a political animal then. And then you can go on further with committees and membership of departments, etc. I would have difficulty in getting involved in policy formation because I'm not accountable to the voting public, but any experience I can add or relevant details, etc., or on how things would work or knowledge, I'd be fully committed to this job. At whatever level, I would look to get involved, but have a line in the sand on making policy. In Tynwald, I can question policy, vote on policy, but making it, you've got to be accountable to the general public to make policy, I think.
And there seems to be a trend, certainly in some quarters, for LegCo members to represent the area that they come from. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I put some thought into this, and I'm not really, to be honest, come to a conclusion, because as a voter, I've never had a problem with LegCo, MHKs electing the LegCo members. And that was the process, and I never really, to be honest, questioned it. But when people start questioning it, I then come up with, well, are you just going to have 32 MHKs then? Where's the difference as such? You're also saying slightly that the MHKs aren't capable of electing suitable LegCo members, whereas probably they're in a better position being on the inside of the machine than on the outside. But then, as you come back again to accountability, there's the public vote is accountability. So I'm relaxed with it as it is, but I'm not per se against any review or suggestions coming forward as to what might change.
So you're not specifically looking for a directly elected legislative council?
I personally not, but if somebody comes forward with a workable idea, I would certainly look at it, and if suitable, I would back it. Yeah.
And in terms of the question about if you were elected as a member of the Legislative Council, would you be there and available for people who live in your area to contact you, or are you there to represent the whole of the island?
I'd be there for anybody in the whole of the island to contact me. One would assume when you're out and about, in Ramsey, there would be a bias towards that area and the people you meet and the comments you take, but my phone, email or whatever will be open to anybody, anywhere. It's about the whole island. It's not about trying to pitch north against south, if you like. It's the whole island's got to go forward.
And I mean, it's very clear from what you've said at the beginning that you have a great passion for making successful businesses. But do you have any particular political passions outside of what directly crops up in relation to your businesses? What makes you tick politically, I suppose, is the question.
I'm concerned, and it was highlighted in the budget. I'm concerned about the slight direction the island's taking and the way it's getting through the reserves at the moment. I think it is right to support the budget because we have just come through some horrendous times with COVID, Brexit, gas prices, etc. And a little bit of stability won't be a bad thing. And the Treasury Minister has said that next year's budget is going to have a different look to it. Well, yes, it's going to have to. We can't keep burning through reserves. And coming from the business background, when you're in a situation like that, you've got one of two options, basically. One is cut costs, and the other is increase revenue. And cutting costs, best practice, efficiencies, etc., they have come up before. They have been, departments have been tasked with cutting costs. And it is very, very difficult to cut costs because even with the budget we had on Tuesday, we still need more doctors, more nurses, more teachers, better schools, better highways, better social services. They all come with a cost all the time. So turning to the other side on increasing revenue, there's the increase in the Manx population and get working population by 5,000. And yes, that's one way to get more tax revenue in. It's probably fraught with a few problems of where they're going to live and places like that. But there's a couple of big ones that probably ought to be moved on now. And although I've said everything about green energy and want the island to get there as fast as it can to carbon neutral, the gas one could be a money earner for the island, a revenue earner, and renting out the seabeds for green windmill, offshore wind power is another revenue earner that needs to be looked at. So some of these have got to be seriously look at how we can't keep spending money without getting more revenue in.
We've heard from Brian Brumby in the first half of the programme. Next up, Gary Clueit. Gary, tell us a bit about your background and motivation for standing for the Legislative Council.
Good on my Phil. Nice to be here. Thanks for having us. I'm a relatively new resident of the island. We arrived here about just over 4 years ago, I guess, ostensibly to retire. My background is, at least on the business side, pretty much 50 years of starting and running technology-based companies, which has given me in multiple countries on multiple continents, which has given me a sort of fairly extensive background in management, strategic analysis of things, working in different cultures, different legal systems, different political systems. And I started out initially as an electronics engineer. My father was an electrical engineer, and I started dabbling with electronics and electrical things when I was a kid still, and I was into music in those days, and I built all my own amplifiers and sound systems, and then found that to be my hobby became a business because I started making sound systems for other people. Once you had a manufacturing process going, I got somewhat bored. And at that time, it was about 1974, I guess it was really the start of the microprocessor generation, where Intel released the early processors at a reasonable cost. And I designed a computer system to use in an industrial plant, the hardware, and built it, and then realized, well, I needed somewhere to program this. In those days, there was no such thing as a computer science degree. You couldn't go to anywhere to learn programming. So essentially, I taught myself to program, and then to make the thing do something, and then also into networking to make them communicate with other things. And ever since then, for the last 50 years, that's been the business that I have been in. I've had numerous companies. I've lived in a number of countries, and the longest I've spent almost half my life in the United States, mostly in Silicon Valley, for obvious reasons. And I guess I've always, the story I like to tell is, my view of a large company was I wanted to have companies where I knew the names of all my employees, their partners, and their children. And when I couldn't do that, the company, that was it. I stopped expanding. And back then, 30, 40 years ago, that said my companies were limited to about 250 employees. It's a lot less than that now. So that's things. But as a small company, the software that we generate, I managed to sign a fairly unique agreement with IBM back in 1994. So basically almost 30 years ago. IBM at that time was the biggest computer company in the world. It's still pretty large, and have managed to navigate and work through that contract all this time. But given the software and the relationship with IBM, all of our customers ended up being some of the largest, in fact, a couple of the largest corporations in the world, and big governments, defense contractors or military organizations themselves, as well as other government departments and things. And one of the problems I've always had as a very small company in dealing with these very, very large companies, you start off at a massive disadvantage because you're you're obviously working to a legal contract, and in a lot of cases you're working to actually specifications, technical specifications, business requirements, and things like that. And you very quickly learn your survival depends upon your ability to scrutinize legal agreements. And it's not so much what's there in many cases, it's what's not there, what they don't put you in, what they don't put in. Or, as I say, the innocuous phrase or couple of words that gets added to a sentence that sound fine, but if it hits the fan, they're going to crucify you. And that was always the thing. Every major contract I signed was essentially betting the farm on it. If it went wrong, I was out of business. There was, because I just couldn't take them on in courts of law. So I think I got a very good background and understanding of legal agreements, and essentially legislation is another is another form of legal agreement. So that's kind of where I've got to, in business. I've always been interested in politics from a very young age. And more about the impact of government and governance on people, and what that interaction is. So I finished school in South Africa and went to university there for 1 year. But I had, for the first time in my life, when I was, 15 or so, I came face to face with abject poverty, and people that would, in a way, I guess they were just hopeless. They had little hope, and the problem was they had no legal recourse to do anything about their lot. They just had to accept it, and to me that was just unacceptable. So basically, in the early 70s, I became involved in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. It got me into an awful lot of trouble. Working on international boycotts of the country, especially the sports teams and things. The upshot of it was I was essentially forced to flee the country with my family. The thing that changed for me, everything that changed politically for me, because I was a firebrand back there. I had no fear. I believed what I was doing was on the right, would be on the right side of history. But in December 1975, my daughter was born, and I remember sitting in the waiting room in the hospital when I heard the first cry, and it was like, it struck me within, 30 seconds. It's like, your life's changed, mate. It was suddenly the people I was fighting, that I was fighting against, had leverage against me, and I realized that, and to some extent that changed my whole. It was very, very sudden, going from a firebrand to because when you're too outspoken and things, essentially you end up making a lot of enemies. And I decided there's probably a better way. So I started to engage with them, and I think that's very important in politics. Is that you have to engage with people. You have to engage with people that you fundamentally disagree with, because ultimately, politics is all about compromise and negotiation. I don't think you can be successful unless you are in a dictatorship where you can kind of do whatever you please. And so, I had a change of attitude to my thing as well. Maybe we need to work together. I can't afford to be. I've got this. I can't afford to do what I was doing any longer. But anyway, eventually left South Africa. I had to leave, and I was invited to go to Sri Lanka by President Bandaranaike at the time. She was in the non-aligned states, and she was very vocal about the apartheid system in South Africa and things. She invited me there, to Sri Lanka. So we went to Sri Lanka, and it was very interesting because she'd asked me to help develop a business plan there's a proposal to the British government for a technology transfer where they could get computer systems funded and things for the government. And so I did that, but we got to talking a lot. And she explained to me. I mean, I had certain views on things. She explained to me the whole thing about Sinhalese nationalism. I understand the rise of the Tamils in Sri Lanka and the trouble. Anyway, it was only a few months later that she basically went out of power. She lost the election, and she was essentially deposed, and I left. And at that time, I was given a permanent residence visa to go to Australia, and went there. But a year or two, and I was still running in technology. I was mostly doing consulting at that point, and I. Let's see. Oh, and then I think it was about 1977, 79, somewhere around there. I got a message from Michael Somare, Prime Minister Somare, who was the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, contacted me to ask me if I would go to Port Moresby to go and do the same thing I'd done for Sri Lanka, which was write a technology proposal, which I agreed to, and it was a referral from Mrs. Bandaranaike. I went there, and I was there for a couple of months, and working in that. Again, I got to know him quite well, and he basically educated me in a completely different form of democracy and how it worked there, and the election strategies that we used and things. But about 4 months in, he lost a vote of confidence in Parliament, and his deputy, Julius Chan, took over, who decided to keep me on, and we also became quite friendly on the things. And the reality was, in public, those two were at loggerheads all the time. They were opposition parties, and things. But behind the scenes, we used to go tuna fishing on the weekends and things like that. But it gave me a very broad insight to different political systems. The thing I remember about Somare losing the vote of confidence, losing the vote of confidence, and Julius Chan taking over was, I remember there was speculation in the Australian press that there would almost be a civil war, because Somare was the first Prime Minister of Independence, and he'd suddenly just lost and basically been turfed out. And it turns out, and it was educational it was an emerging democracy in one of the most primitive countries on the planet, and it was wonderful to see how the model of transition there was a peaceful transition. And then a year or two later, Somare won the next election and was back, and it was a perfectly peaceful thing. Anyway, and then I went to the United States. I went back to Australia for a couple of years. Then I went to the United States to work, and politically, I lived in Arizona initially. Got involved in recalling the governor of California, the governor of Arizona, who was. Never mind. But anyway, we did that successfully. Eventually, I moved to California, into Silicon Valley, in the San Francisco area, and politically got involved there in a proposition to legalize the use of stem cells in research, which is a very controversial thing back in those days, and that was successful. I joined the Democratic Party in 1996, I guess it was, when Bill Clinton got elected. And was a member all the way until 2000, I guess, in 2016. So I worked on the Obama campaign. I was a major donor to Obama's election. I was invited to his inauguration, and so I've always been interested in politics. When I came here, the thing that struck my wife and I is we want to live here for the rest of our days, and there are some issues on the island. And one of the issues that became apparent, because it underpins a lot of the other problems, is housing. Houses are expensive, and there's not enough of them in the price ranges that people can afford. And I'm not talking about people like myself who have done very well, thank you very much. But for average people, for workers, it's a huge challenge. But I didn't understand. I mean, when I came here, it was, and some of the people I knew, it was, the view was, oh, there's no such thing as homelessness on the island. There's none of this stuff. And then I decided to, well, what's the problem? I mean, I'm an engineer. What is the problem with housing? What are the alternatives? How can we fix it? What are the things we can do? Besides, forget about the political aspect of it. Just practically, what are the challenges and things? So I wanted to talk to people about the problems, the specific problems they were facing, and things. So we're better to hang out, to find people that are living in social housing, in assisted housing, have things like that. Is I started going to Manx Labour Party meetings where I met a lot of very interesting people who are living the issue, and gradually came to the realization that we have more than just the affordability issue. There's the issue with social housing, assisted housing, every form of housing that you can think of. We do have a homelessness problem. We have a couch surfers problem. We have all sorts of problems. And what can we do about it? And so mostly what I've been engaged at for the last 2.5, 3 years was doing a lot of research and talking to people and then coming up with what we can do. I was invited to join the Housing Communities Board sometime last year, and that's been very informative and useful. And it was great because one of the things that I do like about it is that the board consists of people from all walks of life. So we got some legal people, we've got realtors, we've got people who've been working on social housing and housing issues for decades here, as well as officials, civil servants, ministers, MHK. I mean, it's a bit of a melting pot, and it works really well because I think it's one of the few things, housing is one of the few things on the island that it doesn't matter what your political background is, who you are, whatever, we all agree it's a problem. The devil's always in the details of how you resolve that. I've done several things. I'm building my own house at the moment. I knocked down a terraced house, a mid-terrace house, and I'm building a passive house in its place. And hired an architectural company, and during the process met a brilliant young architect who was underutilized, in my opinion, who was frustrated, I think, and essentially went into partnership with him and sent him on training, and we started an architectural company that is the only certified passive house design company on the island. And then on the housing thing, I had tried to talk to several builders and things like that about building affordable housing, very highly energy efficient, things like that. And it was really difficult, simply because they're too busy. They don't have the time to look at these things. And it's like, why spend money on upskilling and investments when we've got more work than we know what to do with? Long shot of it was about 6 months ago, I decided to start a development company to build affordable houses. We've got my project, which we're using the company on to train some people. And then we bought some land up we bought a brownfield site up in Ramsey. That will be the next project where we want to build a co-housing development and get it as affordable as possible. My wife and I are doing this on a non-profit basis. I don't want to, it's not a business for me. It's something that I think we need and various other things. So that's probably too long, but that's sort of a nutshell of my journey to where I am.
Yes, a very big nut, it's fair to say, in terms of the nutshell. In terms of LegCo, I mean, what skills do you think you actually need to be a member of the Legislative Council?
Well, firstly, I think LegCo needs a variety of talents, skills, backgrounds, perspectives. I mean, you don't want everybody to be the same, to think the same. And yes, a lot of it's a scrutiny. So you want people who are adept at critical thinking. You want people who I think you are skeptics, who are willing to stand up and be counted, who are willing to express their views when they think something's wrong. But again, I don't think it's to be it's not to be confrontational, things like it. I see MLCs as being there as kind of a backstop to the MHKs and government and potentially departments, that if you've got skills that they need, that they should be available for them to use.
So you would go into a department if asked?
It would depend. On several things. One is, I think the MLC needs to be, if you're going to fulfill your scrutiny role, you can't get too close to any department or to anything, because that, I think, starts to compromise you. And you need to, you need to be able to speak out. So I think, at least for myself personally, in terms of the skills that I bring, which are very broad based, based on a lot of experience in a lot of different areas, I'd certainly be willing to work in departments and potentially multiple departments, because a lot of legislation we introduce, a lot of policies affect multiple departments. And I think one of the challenges of all big organizations, whether it's government or private, is siloing. I mean, people get in, departments do their own thing and don't talk to anybody else. The other thing is, I think, where it's important to work inside departments is when you're bringing through legislation and that, rather than have the department go off and do its own thing and draft legislation and then send it to Keys, and eventually it gets to LegCo, and that's the first time you've seen it, and you tear it to shreds. Well, you've probably just lost 6 months. It's far more efficient if, as a member of LegCo, that you can help smooth the process and things. So if you're going to be looking at alternatives and finding faults and things, the earlier you do it in the process, the better. And so, again, in life, you never say never, and in politics, you even less likely should be saying never. Never. I think there's a role for MLCs in departments. I don't see myself at this stage taking on a full-time role in a department with voting on policy and things like that. I don't think that's why we're there. But having said that, there's not a lot of unanimity amongst the MHKs about what an MLC should be doing and where they should be doing it. So it is a challenge. But ultimately, we have, and I know there's questions raised about how many MLCs should we have, and things. The reality we have on the island, we have a small population. Okay, we only have, well, some people say it's a lot, but relatively a few people in Parliament. If you look at across Tynwald and things like that, but outside of foreign affairs and defense, we have all the same functions of state that huge countries have, and we don't have the people. So to some extent, again, going back to taking roles in departments and things like that, and the way I've always run my businesses, it's whatever it takes. All right, we don't have the luxury of saying absolutely I'm not going to touch this or that, because it's like, oh well, it's not my role. We have a challenge, and I think ultimately you need to be willing to take on whatever is needed to help in that thing. If I'm elected to the position, my view is I'm there to be used and utilized as best as I possibly can, and to some extent that's up to government, the MHKs, the government, the ministers, the departments, and things like that. So I'm willing to help out where I can.
That was another of the LegCo candidates, Gary Clueit. We've now heard from 8 candidates, but there are still 3 more to try and fit in before the election in mid-March. Manx Radio is recording the Liberal Van and LegCo hustings tomorrow, and we hope to bring that to you next Sunday. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gorn, Goramayo, thanks for listening.